Luke Thompson stood in the shadows outside the church, watching through stained glass as another man walked his only daughter down the aisle. 23 years of sacrifice, second jobs, deferred dreams, a life spent ensuring Sophie had everything, reduced to this moment of silent exile. Nathan Stone's expensive suit gleamed in the candlelight as he placed Sophie's hand in her fiancé's. The same Nathan who had lured Claire away all those years ago with promises of wealth, leaving Luke to raise their daughter alone. Sophie's smile, radiant beneath her veil, never turned toward the back pews where her father's designated seat remained empty. Luke had arrived early, seen his name on the card, and simply couldn't bring himself to sit there, a footnote in his daughter's story. His hands trembled, but his dignity remained. The question wasn't whether he would confront her, but how he would rebuild himself afterward. Luke Thompson's hands were rough with calluses as he tightened the final screws on the kitchen cabinet hinge. 16 years of home repairs had taught him efficiency, a necessity when raising a daughter alone on a middle manager's salary. He glanced at his watch. 2 hours before Sophie returned from school, just enough time to finish the leak under the bathroom sink. The modest 3-bedroom house wasn't much by Stone Creek standards, but Luke had maintained it meticulously. Each repair represented hours he could have spent advancing his career, but Sophie had always come first. Their neighborhood might not be prestigious, but it was safe, with good schools and neighbors who nodded respectfully when Luke left for work each morning. "Looking good, Thompson," called Mrs. Jenkins from next door. "Those cabinets giving you trouble again?" "Nothing I can't handle," Luke replied with a tired smile that didn't quite reach his eyes. He moved to the bathroom, muscles aching from yesterday's double shift. The college fund needed padding. Sophie had been talking about pre-med programs. Pride swelled within him, though it mingled with an exhaustion he never allowed her to see. Every sacrifice had been worth it to watch her flourish. Yet lately, something had shifted in their comfortable routine. Small things: Sophie's new designer backpack, her sudden interest in country club activities, her growing silence about school friends. Luke pushed the unease aside. Teenagers changed. That was normal. He tightened the last pipe fitting just as the front door opened. Luke placed the simple casserole on the dinner table. Nothing fancy. His cooking skills remained strictly functional, but wholesome and filling. Sophie picked at it, her attention more on her phone than her meal. "How was your weekend at your mother's?" Luke asked, keeping his tone neutral. Sophie's face brightened. "Amazing. Mom and Nathan took me to Grayson's for dinner. You know, that place where celebrities go. Nathan knows the chef personally." Luke nodded, carefully maintaining his expression. Claire had left when Sophie was 7, drawn to Nathan Stone's wealth and social connections. The divorce papers had cited irreconcilable differences, but the timing had told the real story. "And their house, Dad, you should see it. My bedroom there has this incredible view of the lake. Mom says I can redecorate it however I want." "That's generous," Luke said, focusing on cutting his food. "Did you finish that biology project while you were there?" Sophie waved dismissively. "Mom hired a tutor to help me. He has a PhD from Harvard. Nathan says connections matter more than grades anyway." Each casual mention of Nathan stung like salt in a wound 16 years old. Luke had worked overtime for years to afford Sophie's science camp, while Nathan casually dismissed the value of education itself. "I'm going back next weekend," Sophie announced, finally looking directly at him. "Mom's hosting this charity gala, and she wants me to meet her friends." "That's the 3rd weekend this month," Luke noted, his voice carefully steady. "I thought we were going to visit the community college open house." Sophie's eyes dropped back to her phone. Community college isn't really in my plans anymore, Dad. Luke felt something shift between them, tectonic plates moving imperceptibly but irrevocably. Sunday afternoon sunlight filtered through Sophie's bedroom window as Luke knocked gently, laundry basket balanced on his hip. The door was ajar, Sophie absent, another weekend at Claire's. He set the clean clothes on her bed, noticing the transformation of the room. Designer shopping bags clustered in one corner. New perfume bottles, brands he couldn't pronounce, lined her dresser. A cashmere sweater draped over her desk chair cost more than his entire wardrobe. As he turned to leave, his foot caught on something under the bed. A shoebox. Kneeling to push it back, he noticed it contained framed photographs, removed from the walls and shelves. Their camping trip to Yellowstone. Sophie's middle school graduation. The father-daughter dance, hidden away as if embarrassing. His throat tightened as he carefully replaced the box. Near her desk, a photo album lay open. Sophie at equestrian lessons with Claire, at Nathan's country club beside their swimming pool. New memories being created while old ones were discarded. The front door opened downstairs. Luke composed himself before meeting Sophie in the hallway, her arms full of shopping bags. "Hey, Dad," she said, barely glancing his way. "Did Mrs. Jenkins drop off the mail?" "On the counter," he replied, noticing her new highlights, the unfamiliar designer logo on her jacket. Later helping with her chemistry homework, something he still could offer, Luke tried reconnecting. "I was thinking we could drive up to the lake next weekend, like we used to." Sophie tensed. "Actually, Dad, I've been meaning to talk to you." She set down her pencil, finally meeting his eyes. "I think I want to move in with Mom and Nathan. Their house is closer to Westridge Prep. Mom says they could get me in for junior year." The words hung between them, devastatingly casual, as if she were merely changing bedrooms rather than lives. "I see," Luke said quietly, his world shifting beneath him. "When were you thinking?" "Next month," Sophie replied, already turning back to her textbook, as if the decision were already made. And in her mind, Luke realized it was. Luke poured orange juice into 2 glasses, setting them on the breakfast table before catching himself. The second glass wouldn't be needed. Not today, not tomorrow. 6 weeks had passed since Sophie moved to Claire and Nathan's, but his hands still performed the ritual of preparing breakfast for 2. He returned the carton to the refrigerator, its emptiness echoing the hollow feeling in his chest. The house had never seemed so quiet. Sophie's bedroom remained exactly as she'd left it, door slightly ajar, bed neatly made, a museum exhibit of what once was. Luke passed it each morning, sometimes pausing at the threshold, but never entering. Some spaces felt too raw to disturb. His routines had narrowed to work, home, sleep, repeat. The calendar on the refrigerator, once crowded with Sophie's activities, now displayed blank squares. October became November. Leaves fell. The furnace kicked on. In the living room, Luke reorganized bookshelves, relocated furniture, small changes to acknowledge the shift in his life. The dining room table, once centered, now sat against the wall, a single chair remaining. No need for more. "Haven't seen you out much lately," Mrs. Jenkins commented, when they crossed paths at the mailbox one afternoon, her eyes soft with concern. "Everything all right with Sophie?" "She's doing well at her mother's," Luke replied with the practiced smile he'd perfected for public use. Just adjusting to the quiet. That evening, Luke boxed up the board games they'd never play again, stacked them in the hall closet. He left one photo of Sophie on the mantel, but moved the others to his bedroom. Adaptation, he told himself, not erasure. By December, the house felt less like an abandoned museum and more like a quiet sanctuary. Different, but still his, like the man he was becoming. Different, but still Luke Thompson. Luke's office phone rang mid-morning, interrupting his concentration on quarterly budget reports. Westridge Preparatory Academy's number flashed on the caller ID. Though Sophie had attended for only 3 months, he remained listed as her secondary emergency contact. "Mr. Thompson speaking," he answered, spinning his chair to face the window. "Hello, Mr. Thompson. This is Diane Mercer from the records office at Westridge. I'm calling about Sophie's transcripts." Luke straightened. "Is there a problem?" "No problem at all. Her academic adjustment has been seamless." Papers shuffled in the background. "I'm actually calling because the name on her previous school records doesn't match our system. We show Sophie Stone, but her transfer documents say Sophie Thompson." The words hit like a physical blow. Luke's grip tightened on the receiver. "Mr. Thompson, are you there?" "Yes." His voice remained level through sheer force of will. "There must be a misunderstanding. Sophie's last name is Thompson." "Oh." More shuffling papers. "Well, we have the legal name change documentation on file. It was processed about 6 weeks ago. I assumed you were aware." Luke stared at the family photo on his desk. Sophie at 14, before Claire had re-entered their lives. "I see." "Thank you for clarifying. Shall I update the emergency contact information as well? Currently it lists Luke Thompson, but for consistency—" "That won't be necessary," he interrupted. "Thompson is still correct for me." After ending the call, Luke maintained his professional demeanor as he walked through the office, nodding at colleagues, signing a birthday card someone passed him. Only when he reached his car in the parking garage did he allow himself to react. He opened his wallet, finding the worn family photo behind his driver's license. 3 generations of Thompson men standing proudly with him and baby Sophie. His father's voice echoed in his memory. "A name is more than letters, son. It's who you are." Luke closed his eyes, letting one ragged breath escape before composure returned. Then he started the car and drove back to work, his face a careful mask that revealed nothing of the wound beneath. The aroma of pot roast filled Sarah's kitchen as Luke's sister fussed over the dining table. Her home exuded warmth. Family photos crowded the walls, children's artwork adorned the refrigerator, and the Thompson family Bible occupied a place of honor on the sideboard. "You're looking better," Sarah said, squeezing Luke's shoulder as she passed. "More like yourself." "Getting there," Luke admitted, helping her arrange serving dishes. The back door banged open as Max, Sarah's 19-year-old son, entered still wearing work boots caked with construction site mud. "Uncle Luke!" Max's face lit up. "Didn't know you'd be here tonight." "Shoes!" Sarah protested, but her smile betrayed her affection. Max kicked off his boots, revealing socks with holes in both heels. "Sorry I'm late. We're framing that new development off Hickory Road. Mr. Grayson says I have a knack for precision cuts." "Just like your grandfather," Luke commented. "He could measure twice and cut once better than anyone I knew." Over dinner, conversation flowed easily among the 3 of them. Luke found himself relaxing for the first time in months, the knot in his chest loosening slightly. "Uncle Luke," Max said between bites, "I've been meaning to ask you about Grandpa's old carpentry tools. Dad says they were passed to you." "They're gathering dust in my garage," Luke admitted. "Your grandfather would hate that." "I'd put them to good use," Max said earnestly. "Carrying on the Thompson tradition, you know. There's something about building something that lasts." The simple sincerity in Max's voice struck Luke deeply. Here sat a young man proud of his heritage, while Sophie had discarded it like an outgrown coat. "I'll bring them next time," Luke promised. "They should be used by someone who values what they represent." The doorbell rang as Sarah served apple pie. She returned moments later, an envelope in hand. "Special delivery," she said, passing it to Luke. The cream-colored envelope bore gold embossing. "Sophie Stone and Ethan Winters cordially invite you." Luke's hands trembled slightly as the invitation confirmed what the name change had begun. Sophie was creating a new life where he existed only on the periphery. "Luke?" Sarah's concerned voice seemed to come from far away. "What is it?" "Sophie's getting married," he said, the words hollow in his mouth. "Just a touch more at the waist, sir," the tailor murmured, pins held carefully between his lips as he made subtle adjustments to Luke's charcoal gray suit. Luke stood still, surrounded by 3 angled mirrors that reflected his image from all sides. The formal attire felt both familiar and strange. He'd worn suits throughout his career, but never one this expensive or, for an occasion, this significant. In the reflection, he caught a glimpse of the traditional father of the bride boutonniere the shop had displayed near the register. "And your daughter's wedding must be quite the event," the tailor commented, making another minute adjustment. "Westgate Gardens is booked solid for years." "Yes," Luke responded, maintaining his composure. "Sophie has always had excellent taste." Despite everything, the name change, the distance, the months of minimal contact, Luke clung to this tradition. Walking his daughter down the aisle represented more than just a ceremonial duty. It was the culmination of 23 years of fatherhood. Perhaps, he thought, this ritual might bridge the chasm that had grown between them. "Will you be giving a toast at the reception?" the tailor asked, stepping back to assess his work. "I haven't finalized that yet," Luke replied, though Sophie hadn't mentioned any toast. He'd been included in almost no planning discussions, receiving only the formal invitation like any distant acquaintance. Still, as Luke turned to examine the suit's fit, a cautious optimism flickered within him. Weddings were about new beginnings, reconciliations, family coming together. Surely his role as father would be honored in this most traditional of ceremonies. "Perfect timing," the tailor said, checking his watch. "We'll have this ready for pickup on Tuesday, plenty of time before the big day." Luke nodded, changing back into his regular clothes. His phone buzzed with an incoming call, a bridesmaid he'd met briefly at Sophie's engagement party. Perhaps finally, details about his role in the ceremony. "Mr. Thompson, this is Melissa Andrews. I'm in Sophie's bridal party. She asked me to coordinate some final details with you." Luke sat at his home office desk, wedding invitation propped against a framed photo of Sophie's high school graduation. "Of course, Melissa. I've been waiting to hear about the rehearsal dinner and ceremony specifics." "Great. I just wanted to confirm you received your seating assignment for the ceremony." "You're in row 4 on the bride's side." Luke's brow furrowed. "Row 4? I assumed I'd be, well, involved in the ceremony itself." A brief silence followed. "Oh, well, the ceremony processional is already set. Sophie will be escorted by her father, by Mr. Stone." The words landed like physical blows. Luke's fingers tightened around the phone, but his voice remained steady. "I see. There must be some confusion. I'm Sophie's father." "Right. Yes, of course," Melissa stammered. "I meant her stepfather. I'm so sorry, I thought you knew. Nathan is walking her down the aisle. They've been planning it for months." Luke stared at the invitation on his desk, its gold embossing suddenly seeming garish rather than elegant. "I understand," he said, though he didn't. "Sophie mentioned you two haven't been close recently," Melissa continued, her discomfort evident. "But she definitely wants you there." She made sure you got an invitation to both the ceremony and reception." "How considerate," Luke replied, struggling to keep bitterness from his tone. "The rehearsal dinner is just for the wedding party and immediate family," Melissa added, then immediately seemed to regret her words. "I mean, the parents hosting and—" "That's quite all right," Luke interrupted, saving her from further explanation. "Is there anything else I should know?" "No, that's everything. Again, I'm sorry for any confusion." After ending the call, Luke sat motionless, the phone still in his hand. On his desk, Sophie smiled from within the photo frame, her arm around his shoulders at her graduation. Father and daughter. A relationship that apparently meant nothing now that Nathan Stone offered a more prestigious alternative. The expensive suit, hanging in his closet, now seemed like a prop in someone else's play, a role he'd imagined for himself that had never existed in Sophie's script. Westgate Gardens transformed the early summer day into a fairy tale of white roses and crystal. Luke sat in row 4, exactly as assigned, an empty chair beside him. Sarah had offered to accompany him, but he'd declined. This was a journey he needed to make alone. From his position, Luke had a clear view of the wedding party assembling near the garden entrance. Nathan Stone stood tall in his designer tuxedo beside Sophie, her white gown cascading around her like spun sugar. They laughed together, heads bent in private conversation, the picture of father and daughter, a reality Luke could only observe, not participate in. When the music began, Luke rose with the other guests. Sophie glided down the aisle on Nathan's arm, her face radiant behind her veil. She passed Luke's row without a glance, her eyes fixed on her future husband waiting at the altar. "Who gives this woman in marriage?" the officiant asked, following tradition. "Her mother and I do," Nathan responded confidently, placing Sophie's hand in her fiancé's before taking his seat beside Claire in the front row. Throughout the ceremony, Luke maintained perfect composure, his face betraying nothing of the hollow ache in his chest. He smiled at appropriate moments, stood when others stood, sat when others sat. A well-rehearsed performance of contentment. At the reception, he offered brief congratulations to the couple during the receiving line. "I'm glad you could make it," Sophie said politely, as if addressing her father's dental hygienist rather than the man who had raised her. "I wouldn't have missed it," Luke replied with quiet dignity. "You look beautiful, Sophie." He stayed exactly 90 minutes, long enough to be respectful, but not so long as to endure the father-daughter dance he knew would come later. No one seemed to notice when he slipped away. At home, a certified letter waited in his mailbox. Luke opened it at his kitchen table, reading by the fading evening light. His Uncle William, his father's brother, had passed away 2 weeks earlier. The family attorney requested Luke's presence to discuss a substantial inheritance, a beach house on the coast, and a financial bequest of nearly $400,000. Luke set the letter down, struck by the timing. As one chapter of his life closed with painful finality, another opened unexpectedly before him. "Your Uncle William's will is quite straightforward, Mr. Thompson," Attorney James Caldwell explained, spreading documents across his polished mahogany desk. "As his sole living nephew, you inherit both his liquid assets of approximately $400,000 and his beachfront property in Sandpiper Cove." Luke studied the photograph of the beach house, a weathered but well-maintained 2-story home with expansive windows facing the ocean. He'd visited his uncle there a few times over the years, though never with Sophie. "William was quite specific about his wishes," Caldwell continued, sliding an envelope across the desk. "He left this personal letter for you as well." Luke opened it, recognizing his uncle's precise handwriting. "Luke, I've always admired how you raised Sophie on your own after Claire left. Reminded me of my own journey with Rebecca after her mother abandoned us. Life gives us choices about what to do with hurt. I chose to build something meaningful for my daughter. Whatever Rebecca decides to do with her inheritance when I'm gone is her choice, just as what you do with yours is yours. The beach has always brought me clarity. Perhaps it will do the same for you. Luke folded the letter, struck by parallels he'd never fully appreciated. Uncle William had raised his daughter Rebecca alone too. Luke vaguely remembered family whispers about Rebecca's ingratitude, how she'd pursued her mother's wealthy lifestyle and rarely visited her father. William updated his will last year, Caldwell noted. He originally had planned to leave everything to his daughter, but made changes after they became estranged. I wasn't aware, Luke admitted. The property taxes are paid through December, Caldwell continued. The house is fully furnished and well maintained. You could move in immediately or sell it, entirely your decision. Luke studied the beach house photo again. I'd like to see it before making any decisions. Of course, Caldwell handed him the keys. And regarding the inheritance funds, we can transfer those to your account next week once the paperwork is processed. As Luke prepared to leave, he paused. I'd like to invite my daughter to see the property. She should be aware of this inheritance as well. Certainly, Caldwell replied, though something in his expression suggested he recalled his late client's situation all too clearly. Walking to his car, Luke felt an unexpected lightness. Perhaps this inheritance could provide a fresh start, not just financially, but with Sophie as well. Waves lapped gently against the shore as Luke led Sophie along the wooden walkway to Uncle William's, now his, beach house. Sunshine glinted off the water, and a salt breeze rustled through seagrass flanking the path. I had no idea Uncle William's place was this nice, Sophie commented, sunglasses perched on her head, designer purse swinging from her wrist. You never mentioned it. We weren't close until his later years, Luke explained, unlocking the front door. He valued his privacy. Inside, the house welcomed them with warm wood paneling and comfortable, well-worn furniture arranged to maximize the ocean view. Family photos lined the fireplace mantel, including one of a young Luke with his father and Uncle William on a fishing trip. $400,000 plus this property, Sophie mused, running her fingers along the kitchen counter. That's quite unexpected. Luke watched her carefully. It was generous of him. Mom said beach property in this area goes for 7 figures easily, Sophie continued, moving to the large windows overlooking the ocean. The house is dated, but the location is premium. A developer would probably tear it down and build something modern. I wasn't planning to sell, Luke said quietly. Sophie turned, looking surprised. Really? What would you do with a beach house? You've never been a beach person, Dad. People change, Luke replied. I thought perhaps we could use it as a family place. Your children someday might enjoy summers here. Sophie's expression shifted subtly. That's years away. Ethan and I are focused on our careers first. She hesitated, then added, Actually, if you're considering options, we could really use capital for investment. Ethan's starting his own financial consulting firm, and with Nathan's business troubles lately, we can't count on help from that direction anymore. Luke felt something crucial slipping away. Sophie, this house represents family history. It's just a house, Dad, she interrupted. And honestly, not even our family history. It's Uncle William's. If you sold it, you could help me and Ethan get established properly and still have plenty left for yourself. The casual dismissal of legacy struck deeper than Luke expected. "The money isn't the point," he said. "This place could be something we share, something that connects us." Sophie sighed. "We don't need a house to connect us. And practically speaking, maintaining a beach property is expensive. Why not sell it, invest the proceeds, and everyone benefits?" In her calculating gaze, Luke finally saw the truth with perfect clarity. The relationship he kept trying to salvage existed only in his imagination. To Sophie, he had become merely a potential financial resource, not a father, not even a person with feelings or values worth considering. "I'll need to think about it," he said simply. Luke stood on the weathered deck facing the ocean, listening to the rhythmic percussion of waves against shore. Behind him, Sophie continued discussing potential sale prices and investment strategies, her voice carrying through the open sliding door. The golden late-afternoon light cast long shadows across the beach, illuminating each grain of sand with crystalline clarity. Luke felt a similar illumination happening within, each hope, disappointment, and painful truth suddenly visible in perfect detail. For years, he'd defined himself primarily as Sophie's father. He'd measured his worth by her approval, her success, her happiness. Even after her rejection, he'd clung to the possibility of reconciliation, of regaining what was lost. Now, watching a seagull ride air currents with effortless grace, Luke understood. Worth wasn't determined by others' valuations. Dignity wasn't something Sophie or anyone else could grant or remove. "Dad, are you listening?" Sophie appeared in the doorway. "I was saying we could look into listing agents while we're here. I know someone from Ethan's firm who specializes in luxury properties." Luke turned, truly seeing his daughter, perhaps for the first time in years, not as the child he'd raised or the ungrateful young woman who'd hurt him, but simply as another adult making her own choices, following her own values. "I think I'd like some time alone here," he said quietly, "to consider everything." "Sure, but don't wait too long. The market—" "I understand." Luke's voice was gentle but firm. "I'll be in touch when I've made my decision." Confusion flickered across Sophie's face, unaccustomed to not getting immediate agreement. "Well, I should head back anyway." "Ethan and I have dinner plans tonight." Luke nodded, reaching for his car keys on the side table. "I'll walk you to your car." They moved in silence down the wooden walkway, the only sounds coming from creaking boards and distant waves. At her luxury sedan, Sophie hesitated before opening the door. "You'll think about what I said?" Her tone suggested the outcome was already decided. "I will," Luke replied simply. As Sophie's car disappeared down the coastal road, Luke remained standing at the end of the walkway. Instead of returning to the house, he turned toward the beach, slipped off his shoes, and walked barefoot along the shoreline, away from the house, away from Sophie, toward whatever came next. His footprints in the wet sand lasted only moments before the tide erased them completely. "More coffee?" Sarah asked, refilling Luke's mug before he could answer. The morning sunlight streamed through her kitchen windows, highlighting family photos arranged on the refrigerator door, school portraits, vacation snapshots, and in the center, a faded image of Luke and Sarah as children with their parents. Luke nodded gratefully. After driving aimlessly for hours, following his beach house encounter with Sophie, he'd found himself at his sister's doorstep well after midnight. Sarah had welcomed him without questions, preparing the guest room with the efficiency of someone who understood when space was needed more than words. "You look like you actually slept," Sarah commented, sliding into the chair across from him. "A few hours," Luke admitted. "Thanks for taking me in without notice." Sarah waved away his gratitude. "That's what family does. She studied him over her coffee mug. Want to talk about it now? Luke traced the wood grain of the table with his finger. Sophie wants me to sell Uncle William's beach house. She sees it as an investment opportunity for her and Ethan. Of course she does, Sarah said, her directness tempered with compassion. And you? I don't know. Luke's voice grew quiet. For a moment, I thought the inheritance might be a way to reconnect with her, but all she saw was dollar signs. Sarah reached across the table, covering his hand with hers. Luke, you've spent years chasing her approval. Maybe it's time to consider that some rivers can't be forced back into their original channels. The simple wisdom struck Luke deeply. He'd been trying to redirect a river that had already carved a new path. You know, Sarah continued, buttering toast, Max has been asking about you. He mentioned wanting your advice about some construction project. That boy worships the ground you walk on. Max? Luke looked up, surprised. Why would he need my advice? Because you're the only one in the family who understands building things that last, Sarah said simply. Some rivers flow where you least expect them to. The familiar scent of sawdust filled Sarah's garage as Luke guided Max's hands on the planer. They worked together over a length of oak destined to become a mantel for Max's first renovation project. Keep it steady, Luke instructed. Let the tool do the work. Max's concentration was absolute, his movements becoming more confident with each pass. Like this? Perfect, Luke confirmed. Your grandfather would be impressed. The garage had been transformed into a makeshift workshop, with Luke's truck parked outside to make room. Tools from Luke's own collection lay organized on a borrowed workbench, the same tools his father had taught him to use decades earlier. Thanks for helping with this, Max said, pausing to examine their progress. The contractor wanted $2,000 just for the mantel. Told him I'd handle it myself. Brave of you, Luke commented with a smile. Or foolish, Max laughed. But I figured being a Thompson meant knowing how to work with your hands. Luke felt a warming in his chest at the casual pride in Max's voice. Your great-grandfather built furniture that's still in use today. Quality craftsmanship runs in the family. They worked in companionable silence for several minutes, the rhythmic sound of the planer creating a meditative backdrop. I've been thinking about that beach house of yours, Max said eventually. Mom mentioned it. Sounds like a great place. It needs work, Luke admitted, but the bones are good. I'd love to see it sometime. Maybe help with some renovations. I could use the practice. Luke paused, studying his nephew. At 19, Max already showed the kind of character that took most people decades to develop. Hardworking, respectful, grateful for opportunities to learn. You know, Max continued, running his hand along the smoothed oak, I always wished I'd known Grandpa better. But having you teach me these things, it's like I can still connect to that legacy, you know. I'm proud to be a Thompson, proud of what that name means. The simple sincerity in Max's voice created a profound contrast with Sophie's casual discarding of her family name. Here was a young man who valued what he'd been given, who wanted to build upon it rather than escape from it. I'd be happy to show you the beach house, Luke said, a plan beginning to form in his mind. Very happy indeed. You're certain about this, Mr. Thompson? Attorney Caldwell reviewed the documents spread before them. It's an unusual approach. I'm certain, Luke replied, his voice carrying a confidence that had been absent during their previous meeting. The structure allows me to enjoy the beach house during my lifetime while ensuring it passes directly to Max afterward. And the trust fund gives him access to half the inheritance immediately for his education and business ventures. Caldwell nodded thoughtfully. Your uncle made a similar arrangement, though in his case it was to protect assets from his daughter's spendthrift tendencies. "This is different," Luke clarified. "I'm not trying to punish Sophie. I'm investing in someone who values what these resources represent." 3 days had passed since the woodworking session with Max, 3 days of clarity and purpose, unlike anything Luke had experienced since Sophie's departure. The decision had formed not from anger or revenge, but from a recognition of fertile ground versus barren soil. "I've included provisions for Sophie as well," Luke added, pointing to a specific clause. "A smaller trust fund that becomes available to her children should she have any. The legacy continues, just through a different channel." Caldwell studied Luke's face. "If I may speak candidly, I've handled many estates and inheritances over the years. Most people in your situation would either capitulate to their child's wishes or cut them off entirely. Your approach is thoughtful." "I've had a good teacher," Luke said, glancing at the beach house photo on the desk. "Uncle William recognized something I'm only now beginning to understand. Legacy isn't about obligation, it's about stewardship." Caldwell passed him the signing pen. "The documents are ready whenever you are." Luke took the pen, its weight feeling significant in his hand. With each signature, he felt not the severance of one relationship, but the strengthening of another. Rivers, once redirected, could nourish new fields, create new landscapes of possibility. As he signed the final page, Luke experienced an unexpected sense of peace. For the first time in years, his worth wasn't tied to Sophie's approval or disapproval. His value existed independently of her recognition. "Congratulations, Mr. Thompson," Caldwell said, accepting the signed documents. "You've just changed the course of your family's future." "No," Luke corrected gently. "I've just recognized the course it was already taking." "The profit margin on custom cabinetry is substantial if you manage your time efficiently," Luke explained, pointing to a line item in the business plan spread across the beach house dining table. "Most contractors charge premium rates because they subcontract the work. If you handle it yourself, you can offer competitive pricing while maintaining quality." Max nodded, making notes in the margin. Over the past 6 weeks, the beach house had transformed from a lonely memorial to a vibrant workspace. Half-completed renovation projects dotted the rooms, updated lighting fixtures in the living room, refinished hardwood in the hallway, and a completely remodeled kitchen that now served as their meeting spot over shared meals. "What about equipment costs?" Max asked, tapping his pencil against a column of figures. "The industrial planer alone is $15,000. "Start with what you need, not what you want," Luke advised, his business experience evident in his measured counsel. "Rent equipment for the first year, then reinvest profits. I made the mistake of overextending too quickly with my first expansion." The morning sunlight streamed through newly cleaned windows, illuminating not just the room, but the growing connection between them. The inheritance that Sophie had seen only as money had become something far more valuable, a bridge between generations, knowledge flowing from one to the next. "I'm thinking of calling it Thompson Custom Renovations," Max said, pulling out a rough logo sketch. "Unless you think that's too presumptuous?" Luke smiled, genuine warmth reaching his eyes. "I think it's perfect." The Thompson name should be associated with quality craftsmanship. As they cleared the table for lunch, sandwiches Luke had prepared that morning, the easy rhythm of their interaction reflected weeks of growing mutual respect. In mentoring Max, Luke had discovered parts of himself that had lain dormant during years of seeking Sophie's approval. His confidence had returned, along with a sense of purpose that felt both new and deeply familiar. "We should have the business license by next week," Luke said, glancing at the calendar where dates were marked with project milestones. Ready to make it official? Max's enthusiastic nod contained all the appreciation that Luke had spent years searching for elsewhere. "Ladies and gentlemen," Max announced to the small crowd gathered in front of the renovated storefront, "I'm proud to officially open Thompson Custom Renovations." Luke stood beside Sarah as Max pulled the covering from the new business sign. The elegant script featured the Thompson name prominently, with "Quality Craftsmanship Since 1937" beneath it. A nod, too, when Luke's grandfather had first started working as a carpenter. The modest celebration had drawn neighbors, potential clients, and even a reporter from the local business journal. 3 months of intensive preparation had transformed Max's ambition into reality, with Luke's guidance and initial capital investment providing the foundation. "This young man does beautiful work," Mrs. Patterson, their first client, told Luke. "The built-ins he designed for my living room are exactly what I wanted. You must be very proud." "I am," Luke agreed, watching Max confidently discuss a potential project with another attendee. The shy teenager had blossomed into a poised young businessman, carrying himself with quiet confidence that reminded Luke of his own father. Sarah sidled up beside him, slipping her arm through his. "Well, brother, you've managed to ensure the Thompson legacy continues after all." "Max did the hard work," Luke demurred. "With your guidance," Sarah countered, "and your belief in him." She gestured toward the sign. "That name means something in this community again. People are already calling to get on his schedule because they know a Thompson stands behind the work." Inside the newly renovated showroom, photographs displayed completed projects: the beach house kitchen renovation, custom shelving, a restored historical staircase. Each image featured both Max and Luke, mentor and mentee, working side by side. "I never expected this," Luke admitted quietly. "When Sophie changed her name, I thought that was the end of our family legacy." "Sometimes the river finds a different path to the sea," Sarah said, echoing her earlier wisdom. "Max may not be your son, but he's carrying forward everything that matters about being a Thompson." As if sensing their conversation, Max approached, his face flushed with excitement. "Mrs. Rivera just signed a contract for her whole kitchen remodel. Said her parents had Thompson cabinets installed 40 years ago that are still perfect." The pride in Max's voice as he said Thompson created a warmth in Luke's chest that no financial success could match. This was legacy, not just a name, but values continuing through generations. The bell above the shop door jangled sharply 3 days later as Sophie burst into Thompson Custom Renovations. Her normally perfect appearance showed signs of strain, hair pulled back hastily, designer handbag clutched too tightly. "Dad," she said tersely, ignoring Max, who stood nearby with a client. "We need to talk, now." Luke maintained his composure, gesturing toward his small office at the rear of the showroom. "I'll be with you in a moment, Sophie." He finished explaining a design feature to the client before excusing himself. By the time he joined Sophie, her agitation had visibly increased. "Is it true?" she demanded the moment he closed the door. "You're giving everything to him?" She jerked her head toward the showroom where Max could be seen through the glass partition. "If by everything you mean the inheritance, no," Luke replied calmly. "Max received seed money for the business and will eventually inherit the beach house. Your children will have a trust fund available for their education." "My children?" Sophie's voice rose sharply. "What about me? Mr. Caldwell said you've specifically excluded me from your will." Luke seated himself behind the desk, his manner steady. "I've made what I believe is the best use of those resources. The same resources you suggested I liquidate for your benefit." He's not even your son." Sophie's face flushed with anger. "I'm your daughter." "Yes," Luke agreed quietly. "You are, and you made it very clear that you didn't want the Thompson name or legacy. Max does. This is about the name change or the wedding." Sophie's incredulity seemed genuine. "That's petty, Dad. I never thought you'd be vindictive." "This isn't about punishment, Sophie. It's about investment." Luke's voice remained calm despite the accusation. "I'm investing in someone who values what I have to offer, not just financially, but in terms of knowledge, experience, and family history." Sophie's retort was cut short by the phone on Luke's desk. He answered briefly, then looked up with a strange expression. "That was for you, actually. Ethan is trying to reach you urgently." He handed her the receiver. "Something about Nathan's company filing for bankruptcy protection this morning." Sophie's face drained of color as she grabbed the phone. Her hushed, increasingly panicked conversation provided all the context Luke needed. Nathan Stone's financial empire, which had once lured Claire away and later became Sophie's aspiration, was crumbling. When she hung up, the anger had been replaced by something closer to fear. "I need to go," she said, suddenly avoiding his eyes. "Sophie," Luke called softly as she reached the door. "If you need to talk, not about money, but about what's happening, I'm here." She paused, her hand on the doorknob, but left without responding. Through the glass partition, Luke watched her hurried departure, feeling neither victory nor vindication, only the quiet certainty that boundaries, like foundations, needed to be solid for anything worthwhile to be built upon them. The doorbell rang as Luke was settling in for a quiet evening at home. Opening the door revealed Sophie standing on his porch, her appearance markedly different from their last encounter. Designer clothes had been replaced by simple jeans and a sweater, her hair pulled back in a practical ponytail rather than an elaborate style. "Dad," she said, her voice lacking its usual confidence, "may I come in?" Luke stepped aside, gesturing toward the living room. The space had changed since Sophie had last visited. New bookshelves lined one wall, a comfortable reading chair occupied the corner, and several of Max's woodworking pieces were displayed on side tables. "Can I get you something to drink?" Luke offered. "Just water, thanks." Sophie perched on the edge of the sofa, hands clasped tightly in her lap. When Luke returned with the water, an uncomfortable silence stretched between them until Sophie finally spoke. "I'm sure you've heard about Nathan's situation by now," she began. "The bankruptcy filing, the SEC investigation." "I've seen the news," Luke acknowledged. "What they're not reporting is that most of our assets were tied to his business ventures." Sophie's voice wavered slightly. "The house is being foreclosed on. Ethan and we've had to move into an apartment." Luke nodded, letting her continue. "Mom's gone to stay with her sister in Phoenix. Sophie hesitated. "She suggested I talk to you." "About?" "A loan." Sophie met his eyes directly for the first time. "Just until we get back on our feet. Ethan has job prospects, but they won't materialize for months. We're struggling to cover even basic expenses." Luke studied his daughter, noting the shadows under her eyes, the tension in her shoulders. The power dynamic between them had completely reversed, Sophie now seeking what she had once casually dismissed. "How much were you thinking?" he asked neutrally. 50,000 would get us through until Ethan's new position starts." She attempted a smile that didn't reach her eyes. "We'd pay it back, of course, with interest." Luke set his cup down carefully. "I'll need to think about this, Sophie. Could you come back tomorrow morning, say around 10? Relief flickered across her face. "Yes, of course. Thank you for considering it." As Luke showed her out, He noticed how she paused at the family photo on the entryway table, one showing Luke with Sarah's family, including Max. Something like recognition passed across her face before she quickly looked away. "Tomorrow, then," Luke said gently. After Sophie left, Luke stood in his doorway, watching her car disappear down the street, knowing that his response tomorrow would define their relationship for years to come. Luke sat on his front porch the next morning, 2 mugs of coffee on the small table beside him. The autumn air carried a crisp freshness, leaves beginning to turn gold on the maple tree in his yard. When Sophie's car pulled into the driveway at precisely 10 o'clock, he noted her carefully neutral expression, the face of someone preparing for a business negotiation. "Good morning," Luke greeted her, gesturing to the empty chair across from him. "Coffee?" "Thanks." Sophie accepted the mug, her eyes darting to the folder sitting on the table between them, likely expecting a loan agreement. After a moment of silence, Sophie began. "Have you had time to consider my request?" "I have," Luke replied, his voice gentle but firm. "I won't be providing a loan, Sophie." Her face fell, fingers tightening around the coffee mug. "I see. But I'd like to offer something else," Luke continued. "Something I believe has more value." Sophie looked up, confusion evident in her expression. "I'm offering a relationship," Luke said simply. "Not a transactional one based on financial need, but a real father-daughter connection. I'm offering my time, my experience, my guidance, if you want it." "I don't understand," Sophie said, clearly thrown off balance. "Max has shown me that mentorship can be more valuable than money," Luke explained. "The business is thriving not primarily because of my financial investment, but because of the knowledge and skills I've shared with him." "But our situation is different," Sophie protested. "We need actual financial help, Dad." "I know, and I'm not suggesting this is an immediate solution to your current crisis, but I am suggesting it might be the beginning of a more sustainable path forward." Luke leaned forward slightly. "I could help you and Ethan develop a financial recovery plan. I could share business insights that helped me weather economic downturns. I'm offering a relationship where I contribute my wisdom rather than just my wallet." Sophie stared at him, clearly struggling to process this unexpected turn. "You're really not going to help us financially?" "Not in the way you're asking," Luke replied steadily. "I believe that would ultimately help neither of us. It would reinforce a pattern where you see me primarily as a financial resource rather than a father." Silence stretched between them as Sophie absorbed his words. When she finally spoke, her voice was quiet. "I don't know what to say." "You don't need to say anything right now," Luke assured her. "My offer stands, regardless of your immediate response. Think about it. If you decide you'd like to explore what a genuine relationship might look like, one based on mutual respect rather than financial dependency, I'm here." Sophie set down her barely touched coffee and stood. "I should go." Luke nodded, not pushing further. "The door is open, Sophie." Not with conditions, but with an invitation to something different than what we've had before. As she walked to her car, Sophie paused, turning back with an expression Luke couldn't quite read. Part confusion, part consideration. She didn't commit, but she didn't entirely reject his offer either. Luke remained on the porch long after she'd gone, knowing he'd done what was right, even if it wasn't easy. The beach house glowed with warmth against the darkening evening sky. Luke moved between kitchen and dining room, putting final touches on the celebratory dinner he'd prepared. Max and his wife Jennifer were due any moment, their first visit since returning from their honeymoon 3 months earlier. When they arrived, the embrace Max gave Luke carried a new depth of meaning. Jennifer followed with a bright smile, bringing a homemade pie for dessert. "The place looks amazing," Jennifer commented, admiring the completed renovations. "I can't believe how different it is from when I first saw it." "Max did most of the work," Luke said proudly. "With your guidance," Max added, the mutual respect between them evident. Throughout dinner, conversation flowed easily among the three of them. Business updates from Max, stories from Jennifer's teaching position, and Luke's latest woodworking project created a tapestry of shared lives. "Any word from Sophie?" Jennifer asked gently, aware of the situation from Max. "She came by the shop last week," Luke replied. "Asked about some business advice for Ethan. Small steps, but steps nonetheless." "That's good to hear," Jennifer said sincerely. As Luke served coffee with dessert, he noticed an exchange of glances between Max and Jennifer, the kind that suggested a shared secret. "We actually have some news," Max announced, reaching for Jennifer's hand. "We wanted you to be the first to know." Jennifer's smile widened. "We're expecting a baby in June." Luke's face brightened with genuine joy. "That's wonderful news. Congratulations to you both." "There's more," Max continued, his voice carrying a note of emotion. "If it's a boy, we want to name him Lucas, after you." The simple statement caught Luke completely off guard. He set down his coffee cup, momentarily unable to speak. "You've been more than an uncle to me," Max said, his sincerity palpable. "You showed me what it means to be a Thompson, not just in name, but in character. I want my son to know that legacy." "I don't know what to say," Luke managed finally, deeply moved. "Say you'll be his grandfather in every way that matters," Jennifer suggested warmly. "I would be honored," Luke replied, his voice thick with emotion. Later, after dessert and further celebration, the three of them stood on the beach house porch, watching the sunset paint the ocean in shades of gold and crimson. The continuity of life unfolded before Luke, not in the way he had once imagined, but perhaps in a way that was ultimately more meaningful. Max pointed to a fishing boat on the horizon. "Dad used to talk about teaching me to fish someday. Never happened. But I'll teach little Lucas, right here off this shore. He'll be a fortunate boy," Luke said quietly, "to have you as his father." As daylight faded into dusk, Luke felt a profound sense of peace. The legacy he had once feared lost hadn't disappeared. It had simply found a different, equally worthy vessel through which to flow into the future. Luke remained on the beach house porch long after Max and Jennifer had driven away, the echo of their happy news still resonating in the salt-tinged air. The wooden railing felt smooth beneath his palms, weathered by decades of sea winds yet still solid, much like himself, he thought, with a quiet smile. Waves rhythmically washed against the shore below, their eternal cadence a reminder that life continued its forward motion regardless of human dramas. The sunset had faded now, giving way to a deepening blue where the first stars were beginning to emerge, pinpricks of light against the vastness. He had once measured his worth by Sophie's approval, defining himself primarily as her father. When that identity was rejected, he'd felt not just hurt, but fundamentally diminished, as if his value had been invalidated by her dismissal. Now he understood with a clarity that only experience could bring. Worth wasn't bestowed by others, but arose from within, from living according to one's deepest values. Different stars continued appearing overhead, some brighter than others, some clustered in familiar patterns, others standing alone. Relationships, Luke reflected, were much the same, each unique in its light and position, some forming natural constellations, others existing more independently. There was room in the sky for all of them. The door Sophie had partially reopened might lead somewhere meaningful or nowhere at all. Either way, he was at peace with the uncertainty. He had learned that love without reciprocity became destructive, but love with healthy boundaries nurtured both giver and receiver. Inside the beach house, lights glowed warmly, no longer a museum of memories, but a living space where new traditions were being created. The Thompson legacy continued, not through the path he had once expected, but through channels that proved more receptive to its flow. The greatest irony, Luke thought, as he finally turned toward the welcoming light of home, was that in releasing his desperate grip on what he thought he needed, he had found exactly what he truly wanted. Not mere connection, but connection with meaning.